All right, today we have a doozy. Do you remember back in September of 2022 when Latisha James, who's the Attorney General for the state of New York, when she brought charges against Donald Trump for mortgage fraud? Well, now, about 2.5 years later, the Trump administration, they're bringing charges against Latisha James for, you guessed it, mortgage fraud. That's right. And looking into this case, it's really, really interesting. Now, first of all, I need to tell you, I'm not a lawyer. So why would I be talking about this if I'm not a lawyer? Well, it's because I'm a real estate investor. And I've gotten probably well over 100 loans on real estate. And so when I look at this, I understand a lot when it comes to getting loans on residential and commercial real estate. That's where I'm coming from. I'm coming from the view of a real estate investor. So we're going to do a deep dive into what is mortgage fraud, and then we're going to talk about the two different cases, and you can decide for yourself whether it's Donald Trump or Latisha James that looks like they are more likely to have committed mortgage fraud. So let's go into this deep dive. First of all, what is mortgage fraud? So I went to ChatGPT and I typed in, what is mortgage fraud? And it basically says that there's two types of mortgage fraud. And I'm going to read this so that I don't get it wrong. All right, let's check this out. First, there's the mortgage fraud for housing. Basically, what this means is this: typically committed by a borrower to acquire or maintain ownership of a home. Typical examples include lying about income, employment, or assets on a loan application, or using someone else's identity or credit to qualify for a loan. Or third, falsely claiming a property will be a primary residence to get better loan terms. Or there's fraud for profit. Fraud for profit often involves industry insiders who exploit the mortgage process for financial gain. This would include appraisal fraud, so inflating a property's value to justify a larger loan, or something called a straw buyer, which is using someone else's name and credit to secure a mortgage with no intention for the actual person to live in or pay for the property. It also includes not getting the right loan for the right property. So what does that mean? There are things called commercial loans and there's things called residential loans. Residential loans are loans that you can get on properties that have 4 or fewer units. So I can go get a fourplex and I can live in one unit and I can rent out the 3 other units. And the other people living in the units can help me pay for the mortgage. That's fantastic. But if I get a 5-plex or more units, then what happens is that no longer is going to qualify for a residential loan. But what it would qualify for is a commercial loan, because 5 units or more are considered commercial properties because you buy it in order to make money. So what are the consequences of mortgage fraud? Well, here's a few of them. You can get fines, you have to do restitution, or prison time, up to 30 years of prison time. It can also include losses of professional licenses. So those seem like pretty big deals. So why is that? Why is it that all of these details really matter when it comes to getting a mortgage on a property? Well, let me share with you what I think. Here in the United States, the government subsidizes housing. But outside of the United States, a lot of governments don't subsidize their housing. And I learned about this when I purchased some vacation rentals out in Costa Rica. By the way, they're amazing vacation rentals. So if ever you're going to Costa Rica, check them out. I'll put a link in the video description below. Anyway, here in the United States, the government subsidizes housing. And let me share with you why I think the government does this. Let me describe a scenario to try to explain it. Let's say there are 2 people, they're both in their 30s. And the first person goes and buys a house. And over the next 30 years, that person pays down the house until they own it in full. The other person decided that they were just going to rent. So they've rented for about 30 years. Now let's take a look at these people 30 years later. The person that bought the house for maybe $200,000, maybe that house is worth now $400,000 after 30 years. That's possible. The other person just paid rent for 30 years and they do not have a house at the end of the 30 years. So the person who bought the home, they now have this asset worth $400,000 and they could live there without needing to pay the mortgage, or they could move in with maybe one of their kids and they can rent it out, or they can move in with one of their kids, they could sell it, or if they need to go into an assisted living facility, they're able to sell the house and that could help pay for the assisted living facility. Now let's consider the second person who didn't buy a house. When they go to retire, they're not going to have this $400,000 asset. And if they didn't save some other way, it could be that when they retire, they now don't have an income. And so they need to rely on the government in order to help subsidize their living expenses. So when you compare the two scenarios, the government benefits, in fact, we all benefit when people become homeowners and they have home ownership. So that's my theory as to why the government subsidizes home ownership. So when someone lies on a mortgage loan application, basically what they're doing is they're taking advantage of a program that was created in order to help people become homeowners. Because a lot of times when you try to become a homeowner, you can have less of a down payment and you get a preferred interest rate. And that helps a lot of people become homeowners. However, if you're taking advantage of it by lying, then you get cheaper interest rates and often have to put less of a down payment. And so you enrich yourself off the program that was created in order to help people become homeowners. And the government doesn't like to be lied to. And so if it finds out that you lied on the mortgage loan application, then guess what? You can have hefty fines and you can even have prison time. Now let's look at the cases themselves and you can decide which of the two people it looks like was more closely aligned with committing mortgage fraud. As we go into these cases, I want you to pay attention to the difference between subjective information and objective information. Subjective information is information that is based on opinion of somebody, whereas objective information, you don't need an opinion to have the information. This will make sense in just a moment. Let's go ahead and take a look at the case of Donald Trump first. We're going to look at the three main allegations against Donald Trump for mortgage fraud. They say that Donald Trump and his organization inflated the values of the real estate properties. So let's talk about what value is. There's a difference between value and cost. For example, let's say a teenage girl is going to a Taylor Swift concert. That girl may think that this is the greatest thing in the world to go to that concert. And that ticket to get in may cost $200. Now let's say that I'm going to a Taylor Swift concert. Do I like Taylor Swift? Yeah, I like some of her music, but I'd never say I'm a Swiftie. I may spend the same amount of money as that teenage girl did to buy a ticket to the concert. But that teenage girl is just having a fantastic time and getting much more value out of the concert than me. So the price may be $200. The value that teenage girl may get may be thousands of dollars, whereas me, maybe $200. So value is subjective while price is objective. Now, when it comes to real estate, I may take a look at my house and I might think that, you know what, my house is amazing. I love my house. My house should be worth $2 million. Well, is it worth $2 million? I don't know. The truth is, the house is worth what someone's willing to pay for it. Regardless of my opinion of the value of the house is worth what someone is willing to pay for it. Now, if the bank is considering giving me a loan for me to buy my house, well, that's a little bit different. The bank doesn't care what my opinion of the value is for the house. I may think the house is the coolest in the world, and I may be willing to buy it for $2 million. However, the bank is going to look at it and say, I don't know if it's worth $2 million. I'm going to hire an appraiser, and the appraiser is going to go to the house and determine how much that house should be valued at. So how does the appraiser do this? Well, the appraiser looks at the house, and they compare that house to other houses that are similar to it within a short distance from that house. Now, if you're in Arizona and you live in a tract home, meaning that you live in a house that are just like all of the other neighbors' houses, it's very easy to determine a value of your house because it's likely that houses around your neighborhood have gone for sale within the last 6 to 12 months, and an appraiser can look and see, well, that house sold for $300,000 and that house sold for $300,000. So I can see that your house should sell for about $300,000. However, if you have like a custom build house that isn't like the other houses, it becomes a lot more subjective as to what the value of your house should be. Now let's take a look at a couple of the houses that they say Donald Trump inflated the price on. Well, one is a place called Mar-a-Lago. Mar-a-Lago is a house in Florida where it's really close to the shoreline, has beautiful views, it's a massive house. It's more like a country club estate that Donald Trump owns. Now, Donald Trump said that that house was worth several hundreds of millions of dollars. And what's laughable is during that trial, they said that that house should be worth about, I think it was $18 to $25 million, which is very laughable when you look at the whole estate. there's no way that that entire estate could be rebuilt for 18 to $25 million. And that doesn't even include the land that the property is on, which is beautiful land where you can see the ocean and it's just absolutely incredible. So are there other properties near Mar-a-Lago that are just like Mar-a-Lago with the same views of the ocean, the same acreage, the same style, and the same square footage as that property that sold within the last 6 to 12 months that you can take and say, okay, this is what Mar-a-Lago should be worth because this property was sold 6 months ago for $25 million. Therefore, Mar-a-Lago should be valued at $25 million. Are there properties like that? The answer is no. So how do you come up with the value of that property? The answer is it's very difficult because you have to value what is the land worth, and then you have to value what would be the rebuild cost for this house, for this entire estate, if everything were to burn down and you were to scrape it and start over. How much would it cost in order to build that entire property? And then you have to value the desirability of that property along with historical significance and all of that. The truth is, it's just really, really hard to value a property like that. The next property that they say he overvalued was the Trump Tower triplex. Trump allegedly claimed his penthouse apartment was over 30,000 square feet and valued at $327 million, while its actual size was less than 11,000 square feet. This is a good question. Is that mortgage fraud? If Donald Trump says, yeah, my house is like 30,000 square feet, in actuality, it's only 11,000 square feet, well, that sounds like he lied on the application. In fact, I think anybody that fills out an application can put down square footage that's either more or less than what the square footage of the house is. So how does one know? This goes back to the appraiser. The appraiser is tasked with verifying the information found on the application. I've gotten well over 100 appraisals done on my properties. And what happens is the appraiser shows up and he takes a picture of every room in the house. Then he goes outside, takes a picture of the front of the house, takes a picture of the roof, takes a picture of the back of the house, takes a picture of every area of the house, and then he walks the property to determine the square footage of the house. He takes that information and he compares it to county records. Why does he do this? He does this to verify all of the information so that the things that you put on the application are in fact true. So when someone says they earn a certain amount of money in order to get a loan on a property, the banker says, well, verify that for me. Show me bank statements or pay stubs showing how much you really make. Or if they say, my house is 30,000 square feet, they say, oh, that sounds great. We'll send an appraiser over there to verify that information. So when it comes to valuation, remember what I talked about at the beginning. There's subjective information, then there's objective information. Square footage is objective information. You can actually measure the square footage. The value of a house is subjective information. It's information based on an opinion. Now, it may be the appraiser's opinion, which is great, as long as the appraiser is really good at what they do. But basically, the appraiser has to get all of this information to give you a subjective value, what they think the property is worth. And if you've ever purchased a property or sold a property, you've probably worked with an appraiser. And if you've ever worked with an appraiser, then you've probably gotten frustrated with their opinion of a value that came in. And this brings us to the third property at 40 Wall Street. It says, despite appraisals valuing the property at $200 million in 2010 and $220 million in 2012, Trump reported its value at over $500 million in financial statements. Again, that sounds like an opinion. It sounds like Trump might look at the appraisal and think, you know what, this appraisal, it's bogus. I disagree with that. I think my property is worth $500 million. So he puts down $500 million. Now, is that mortgage fraud? It's a good question. It says overinflating the value of a property in order to get better terms constitutes mortgage fraud. But when it comes to valuing properties, we know that valuation is a subjective process. The last big allegation was him misrepresenting the values on financial statements. And that kind of goes back to what we talked about before. So now let's take a look at the allegations against Latisha James. So there's three main allegations. First, there's a property in Norfolk, Virginia. It says that in 2023, James allegedly claimed a property in Norfolk, Virginia as her primary residence, assuming that it was to secure a better mortgage rate. However, as the sitting Attorney General of New York, she was required to reside in New York, raising questions about the accuracy of this claim. That goes back to fraud for housing. When you put down on an application, this is going to be my primary residence. So again, subjective versus objective. Writing on a mortgage loan application, this is going to be my primary residence, or checking that box, that's either objectively there or it's not there. Let's look at the next one. It says that she had a property in Brooklyn, New York, and James is accused of misrepresenting the number of units in a Brooklyn investment property, stating it had 4 units instead of 5. This discrepancy could have qualified her for a loan intended for smaller properties. Remember, residential loan versus commercial loan. Residential loans are lower usually than a commercial loan. So if she's getting into a 5-plex and she's getting a loan that would only be qualified for a 4-plex, then that would constitute misrepresenting the number of units in order to get better terms. Now, this is easily fixed. All you have to do is take one of the units and bust open a wall and connect it to another unit, and then take out one of the kitchens. And boom, now you have 4 units. Did she do that? I don't know. She might have. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. But if she kept it 5 units and she got a loan that you get for 4 units or less, then it's starting to be more objectively, she got the residential loan for a commercial property. Lastly, on one of the mortgage loan applications, it shows that Latisha James was the wife of her father. Now, I don't know exactly what that was. Was it a mistake? I don't know. But if she got a loan where his income and her income were both used in order to get the loan, that seems interesting.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
That also would be objective if it shows on the mortgage loan application that she was the wife of her father. So I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how this is going to play out in court, but what is interesting is, as a real estate investor who doesn't want to go to jail, I've learned a ton studying up on mortgage fraud. Now that we've talked about what mortgage fraud is and what objective and subjective is, who do you think out of the two committed mortgage fraud? Do you think it was Donald Trump? Do you think it was Latisha James? Do you think it was both? Put in the show notes who you think it was. As for me, I learned a ton studying up about mortgage fraud, and I'm actually going to be shifting a little bit about what I do in order to make sure that I don't commit that, because I like what I do, I like my freedom, and I don't want to go to jail. And I encourage all of you, especially those investors that are really creative, be very careful that your creativity doesn't go outside the lines into fraudulent and illegal behavior. Hopefully this video was helpful for you. If you liked it, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate it. And I want to wish you well. Good luck investing in real estate.